The church doors closed behind her with a sound that felt final, like the sealing of a tomb. Emma Reed stood at the entrance in a white dress that cost more than her mother's car, clutching a bouquet of roses she didn't even remember choosing. The organ music swelled around her, sweet and ceremonial, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run. She had ignored the signs for months. The way Marcus controlled her schedule, how he slowly separated her from her friends. The nights he came home, smelling like whiskey and excuses. But she told herself it was love. She told herself every couple had struggles. She told herself she was too close to the wedding to back out now. So she took that first step down the aisle, her legs trembling beneath layers of silk and lace. And that's when everything changed. A hand touched her arm. Rough, firm, protective Emma turned and found herself staring at a man she'd never seen before in her life. He was icily, 6'3", broad-shouldered, with a salt-and-pepper beard and a leather vest that bore the unmistakable patch of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. His eyes were steel gray and completely focused on her. Before she could scream or pull away, he leaned in close and whispered 5 words that shattered her reality. "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her father had died 2 years ago from a heart attack. She had walked through the grief alone because Marcus said dwelling on the past wasn't healthy. She had planned to walk down this aisle solo because Marcus said hiring someone to play the role would be pathetic. And now, this stranger, this biker, this man who looked like he could crush bones with his bare hands, was standing beside her like a guardian angel sent from hell itself. If you believe in protecting the vulnerable and second chances, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe because this story will restore your faith in unexpected heroes. The guests began murmuring. Heads turned. Emma saw Marcus's face at the altar shift from confusion to barely concealed rage. His best man whispered something in his ear. Marcus's jaw clenched, but the biker beside her didn't move. He simply placed her hand gently on his arm and began walking her forward, slowly, deliberately, like a father giving away his daughter. Emma wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who are you? What danger? Why are you doing this? But something in his presence silenced her. It wasn't fear. It was the strangest sensation of safety she'd felt in months. As they moved up the aisle together, she noticed other bikers standing at the back of the church. 5 of them, all wearing the same vest. All watching with the focused intensity of soldiers on a mission. They hadn't been there when she arrived. They appeared like shadows materializing at sunset. When they reached the altar, the biker didn't step away. He stood firm beside Emma, his body angled slightly in front of hers. Marcus's smile had turned into something sharp and dangerous. The officiant looked between them, completely lost. The church had gone from confused murmurs to shocked silence. Emma felt the world tilting. And then the biker spoke again, his voice low enough that only she and Marcus could hear. "I know what you plan to do after the vows." Marcus's face went white, then red, then a shade of purple Emma had never seen on a human being. "You have no right," Marcus hissed through clenched teeth. "This is my wedding. Get out before I have you arrested." But the biker didn't flinch. He turned slightly to Emma, his eyes softening in a way that reminded her so much of her father that tears began streaming down her face. "Last night I was at Murphy's bar downtown," he said quietly. "Your groom was there, drunk, loud, bragging to his buddies." Emma felt her knees weakened. The biker continued, his voice steady and factual. He said marrying you was the best investment he ever made, that your father's life insurance payout and the house you inherited would set him up for years. He laughed about how easy it was to manipulate a girl with daddy issues. The words hit Emma like physical blows. Each one confirmed a fear she'd been too terrified to name. She looked at Marcus and saw the truth written all over his face: guilt, panic, and beneath it all, cold calculation. "That's a lie," Marcus snarled, stepping forward. "You're some random psycho trying to ruin my life." But his voice cracked. His hands were shaking. The biker pulled out his phone and held it up. "I recorded the whole conversation," he said calmly, "including the part where you talked about how you'd convince her to sign over the house within a month, and the part where you said if she resisted, you'd make her regret it." The church erupted, gasps, shouts. Emma's mother stood up from the front pew, her face a mask of horror. Emma staggered backward, and the biker caught her elbow, steadying her. "Breathe," he said softly. "You're safe now, I promise." Emma looked up at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and saw something that broke her heart and healed it simultaneously. Regret, deep, soul-crushing regret. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "Her name was Sophie. I was a terrible father, angry, controlling, drunk most of the time. She ran away when she was 17. I never saw her again." His voice cracked on the last word. Emma saw the pain etched into every line of his weathered face. "I spent 10 years trying to find her," he continued. "And when I finally did, I learned she'd died 3 years earlier. Overdose, alone in a motel room in Nevada." He took a shaky breath. "I didn't get to save my daughter, but I swore on her grave that I'd never let another girl walk into the kind of trap she ran from. So when I heard your groom bragging last night, I knew I had to be here." Emma couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process the enormity of what was happening. Marcus suddenly lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with a grip that would leave bruises. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "You're mine. You signed the papers. You made promises." But before Emma could even react, the biker moved like lightning. He broke Marcus's grip with one smooth motion and stepped fully between them. The other bikers moved up the aisles in perfect synchronization. "Touch her again," the biker said, his voice dropping to something dark and dangerous, "and you'll learn what Hell's Angels really means." Marcus stumbled backward, suddenly aware he was outnumbered and outmatched. Someone in the crowd called the police. Emma's mother rushed forward, pulling Emma into her arms. "I knew something was wrong," her mother sobbed. "I told you, he changed you. I told you something felt off." Emma clung to her mother and realized with crushing clarity how blind she'd been, how thoroughly Marcus had isolated her, how close she'd come to losing everything, including herself. The police arrived within 10 minutes. The biker, whose name she learned was Clayton Clay Holloway, played the recording. Marcus's voice filled the church, slurred and boastful, laying out his entire scheme in drunken detail. The plan to max out credit cards in her name, the plan to sell her father's vintage car collection, the plan to convince her to take out a second mortgage, and, chillingly, the plan to make her disappear if she ever figured it out and tried to leave. Marcus was arrested on the spot. Fraud, intent to commit financial exploitation. The detective told Emma that Marcus had done this before, twice, 2 women he met online. Both times he'd walked away with 6 figures before disappearing. Emma had been target number 3. She watched them lead him away in handcuffs, and instead of heartbreak, she felt a strange sense of liberation, like chains she didn't know she was wearing had finally shattered. The church emptied slowly. Guests offered awkward condolences and shocked support. Emma's bridesmaids hugged her, several of them admitting they'd been afraid to say anything about their concerns. Emma stood in the empty church with Clay and his brothers, still in her wedding dress, feeling like she'd survived a car crash. "Why?" she finally asked Clay. "Why risk everything for a complete stranger?" Clay was quiet for a long moment. "Because nobody did it for Sophie," he said simply. "And I have to believe that if I do it enough, maybe somewhere, somehow, it balances the scales." Emma started crying again. Not from fear or sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that this man, this supposed criminal, this member of an outlaw motorcycle club, had just saved her life. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being the father I needed today." Clay's eyes glistened. He pulled off his Hell's Angels vest and draped it gently over her shoulders. "You wear this until you feel strong enough to stand on your own," he said. "And when you're ready, you give it back and you walk forward." Emma nodded, clutching the leather vest like a lifeline. Over the following weeks, Emma rebuilt her life with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. She changed all her passwords, closed the joint bank account Marcus had convinced her to open, got a restraining order, moved to a new apartment, started therapy. And every Sunday, she visited Clay at the motorcycle clubhouse on the edge of town. They'd sit on the porch, drinking coffee, and he'd tell her stories about Sophie, about his journey from angry drunk to sober protector, about the Hells Angels' lesser-known community outreach programs. Emma learned that Clay and his brothers ran a nonprofit helping victims of domestic violence. They provided security for women fleeing abusive situations. They escorted kids to school who were being bullied. They showed up at hospitals to support families of violence victims. The media called them outlaws, but Emma called them heroes. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Emma walked into the clubhouse with a small gift bag. Clay looked surprised. Inside was a silver picture frame. In it was a photo Emma had found online, the only picture of Clay and Sophie together from when Sophie was 5 years old, smiling, gap-toothed with her father's arm around her. Clay stared at the photo, his hands trembling. "How did you?" he started, his voice breaking. "I hired a private investigator," Emma said softly. "I wanted you to have something to remember the good days." Clay set the frame down carefully and pulled Emma into a hug that felt like absolution. "You gave me back my daughter," he whispered. "Even if just in a picture. Thank you." They stood there for a long moment, two broken people who'd found healing in the most unlikely friendship. Emma eventually started a blog about her experience. It went viral. She was interviewed on podcasts and local news stations. Her story inspired dozens of women to leave dangerous situations. She partnered with Clay's nonprofit, using her inheritance not for Marcus's schemes, but to expand their domestic violence prevention programs. She named the program Sophie's Shield in honor of the daughter Clay couldn't save. 6 months after the wedding, Emma stood in front of a room full of survivors, wearing a Hells Angels support shirt Clay had given her. "I almost married my nightmare because I was too afraid to trust my instincts," she told them. "But a stranger showed up and pretended to be my dad, and that act of kindness saved my life." She paused, looking at Clay in the back of the room. "Sometimes the family we need doesn't come from blood. It comes from the people brave enough to show up when we're in danger, even when they have nothing to gain." Especially then, the room erupted in applause. Clay wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. After the event, Emma and Clay sat outside under the stars. "Do you think Sophie would be proud of you?" Emma asked. Clay was quiet for a long moment. "I hope so," he finally said. "I hope wherever she is, she knows I'm trying to be the father I should have been." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand. "I know she's proud," Emma said firmly, "because I'm proud, and I'm grateful every single day that you walked into that church." Clay smiled a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said. "I almost didn't go. I almost convinced myself it wasn't my business. But I kept thinking about what Sophie would want me to do, and I knew she'd want me to protect you." Emma felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Then she saved both of us," she whispered. A year later, Emma stood as the maid of honor at her mother's wedding, genuinely happy and free. Marcus was serving 3 years for fraud and attempted exploitation. The case had made headlines, exposing a pattern of predatory behavior. Emma had testified with her head held high, and when she walked back down that aisle after her mother's ceremony, Clay was waiting at the end. Not in a biker vest this time, but in a suit, looking uncomfortable but proud. "How do I look?" he asked, tugging at his tie. "Like the father of the bride," Emma said, linking her arm through his. "Which is exactly what you are." Clay's eyes glistened. Emma had legally changed her emergency contact to his name. She'd listed him as family on every form that mattered, because that's what he'd become. Not through biology or marriage, but through the fierce, protective love that shows up when it's needed most. As they walked out of the church together into the golden afternoon light, Emma thought about how close she'd come to losing everything, how one stranger's decision to intervene had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "Thank you for pretending to be my dad," she said quietly. Clay stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I stopped pretending months ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my daughter now, in every way that matters." Emma threw her arms around him, and they stood there in the church parking lot. To people who'd found family in the wreckage of their separate tragedies, the Hells Angels brothers waited by their motorcycles, engines rumbling, ready to escort them to the reception, ready to protect, ready to celebrate, because that's what family does. Emma climbed onto the back of Clay's bike, her dress carefully tucked, and wrapped her arms around the man who'd saved her life by showing up when no one else would. As they pulled onto the highway, the wind whipping through her hair, Emma thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, scared, controlled, walking toward a nightmare dressed as a wedding, and she thought about the woman she was now, strong, free, surrounded by a chosen family of unlikely heroes. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Emma couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes the angels sent to save us don't come with wings and halos. Sometimes they come with leather vests and motorcycles. Sometimes they come with regrets they're trying to redeem. And sometimes they whisper 5 words that change everything. "You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad." Emma held on tighter as they rode into the future, knowing that whatever came next, she'd never walk alone again. If this story moved you, like, comment, and share. Tell us in the comments about a time someone unexpected protected you. And remember, sometimes the family we need is just waiting for us to be brave enough to accept their help.